All right, everybody, welcome back to Leading the Charge. I'm your host, Brandis P. Bonos. Got a big show coming up for you guys today. I hope you guys are very excited. Today I'm going to be talking all about this Israel versus Iran war and what the future holds, what's likely to happen, what the likely outcomes are going to be in the near future. Because to be honest, I have no idea. I have some predictions. But there's been so much misinformation and disinformation that's come out in the recent weeks, and I don't even know what to believe anymore at this point. There's been so much deception, misdirection, misinformation, and so we're going to find out soon. I mean, Trump said that next week he was going to be hosting negotiations with Iran again. Iran has not confirmed whether or not they will comply. But that's what Trump's saying, and Trump says a lot of things, so we'll find out in the coming days. The meetings are scheduled for the 29th, which is this coming Monday, or Sunday. Well, Sunday or Monday? Sunday, this coming Sunday. So we'll find out soon enough. With that being said, man, this conflict has been crazy, huh? I just want to say that. This conflict has been crazy. Everything has just been, it's been insane. People celebrating the ceasefire as if this is it. This is the end. It's all over. Trump saved the world. No more World War III. Everything is fine and dandy. And then you got a bunch of people saying, oh, it's World War III. Oh, everybody's going to die. Oh. Trump is going to have us go into another Iraq war. And it's like, neither of those things happened. And when you really look at the conflict from a more metagame lens, you'll start to realize a lot of this is choreographed. There was a post from the New Arab saying that Tehran got a call from the U.S. saying that they were going to strike Natanz and Fordow and Isfahan. So they telegraphed it. They let them know ahead of time. Because let's be real. From the beginning, it's been obvious the United States and Iran do not want this to escalate into a full-on regional war. That would be catastrophic for obvious reasons. I mean, Iran is a country of 92 million people. They're ethnically diverse. You have Turkmenistans living there, Balochis living there, you have Kurds living there, you have Arabs living there, you have Sunnis living there, you have Sufis living there, and then you have half the population being Persian. So if there was a full-scale ground invasion, Iraq-style occupation, inevitably that would create a refugee crisis, humanitarian crisis. It could disrupt supply lines, could cause inflation. So, obviously, neither country wants that. It doesn't benefit Iran. It certainly doesn't benefit the United States or Israel. And it doesn't benefit the surrounding Gulf states in any way. I mean, we're talking about a country of 92 million people being plunged into a sectarian war where you have Sunnis and Shias and Arabs and Balochis and Kurds and Persians fighting it out in the streets. You have a refugee crisis, millions of people fleeing the country, humanitarian crisis, people not getting food or medicine, people dying, mass death, supply chains disrupted, global economy being disrupted by this. So, for obvious reasons, Iran and the United States do not benefit from a full-scale war. So anybody who projected that happening, you can't really take them seriously. Nobody wanted boots on the ground. Nobody wanted an occupation. And to my understanding, nobody outside of Israel really wants a full-scale regime change. So that's that. But I want to get into this because I want to recap this thing. I want to figure out where are we going from here? Because this is the important thing to understand. This is the important thing to gather. We have a ceasefire in place. We're supposed to be holding negotiations next week. None of the fundamental dynamics have changed. Israel still wants to strike Iran because they don't think the job is done. Iran is probably less likely now to want to give up their enrichment and to want to send out their stockpile of highly enriched uranium now, considering that they've just been hit and they have hardliners in the government who want to go ahead and take the North Korea route, where they have a nuclear weapon as a backstop, and then they have all these conventional weapons that they can use, like ballistic missiles, to exert influence and keep their regional adversaries in check. And they have an ICBM that has a payload on it that you can put a warhead on with a nuclear subcritical mass inside of it that can be sent all the way to Washington, D.C. So there's effectively nothing that we can do, militarily at least, to overthrow North Korea. And there's hardliners in the IRGC, I guarantee it, who are dead set on taking the North Korea path. Because North Korea has been vindicated. Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il have been vindicated. They said, fuck the sanctions, fuck Western integration, fuck the world order. We're going to get a nuclear weapon. We're going to become a powerful country, and we're going to meet you where we are. So that debate is obviously happening in Iran. And I think the argument for pursuing a nuclear weapon has probably gotten stronger since the attacks. I don't think it's reduced the desire or the will or the inertia within the current regime to pursue a nuclear weapon at all. But that's just my opinion. But let's talk about this. Let's go back to June 12th, because this is important. Where are we today? Israel was able to wipe out the top ranks of the IRGC. They killed 20 commanders. We're talking drone unit commanders, aerospace commanders, intelligence, air defense, wiped all of them out. And then the people who were supposed to replace them, the people who controlled the engineering arm that's responsible for operations and funding, the people who came in to replace the first people who got killed on the 13th, they were then assassinated. And then the top ranks, or at least the people who came in to replace the initial top ranks, a lot of them got blackmailed by Mossad. Mossad was sliding envelopes under people's doors and saying, we're going to assassinate you if you don't comply, if you don't turn, if you don't flip on the regime. So you had that. On top of that, you had nuclear scientists, at least 14 of them, upper echelon nuclear scientists being assassinated. You had the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran being assassinated, along with dozens of others. All right, so you had that. All of their long-range missile defense batteries, their S-300s, all of them were completely decimated within like a day or two. Completely decimated their long-range air defense. All of their radar towers, all of their long-range radar towers, all of their known long-range radar towers, completely decimated. You had Natanz, you had Fordow, you had Isfahan, their reconversion, conversion, and fabrication facilities degraded, significantly degraded, and that's still up in the air, and we'll get more into that in a second. But you had that degraded. Half of Iran's ballistic missile stockpile completely wiped out. That's according to the IDF. They attacked their military bases. They attacked their weapons depots. You get it. And then you had billions of dollars worth of infrastructural damage in Tehran, in Isfahan, in Qum, and even in the eastern province of Iran, all right, and in Tabriz. So we had billions of dollars worth of infrastructure damage, wiping out the top ranks of the nuclear program, wiping out the top ranks of the IRGC, okay, significantly degrading their nuclear capabilities, taking out their fighter jets, 2 of their fighter jets, taking out many of their helicopters, billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. So it's safe to say that, for lack of better words, Israel put the belt to Iran's metaphorical ass in like 12 days. I mean, they had air superiority in like less than 72 hours, all right? Just completely blitzed them. Caught Iran off guard. And so where does that leave us today? Well, this is according to the White House official website. It says here, this is from President Trump. He says, monumental damage was done to all nuclear sites in Iran, as shown by satellite images. Obliteration is an accurate term. The white structure shown is deeply embedded into the rock, with even its roof well below ground level and completely shielded from the flame. The biggest damage took place far below ground level. Bullseye! Furthermore, the White House official website posted a quote from the Israel Atomic Energy Commission. It says here, "The devastating U.S. strike on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, combined with Israeli strikes on other elements of Iran's military nuclear program, has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons by many years. The achievement can continue indefinitely if Iran does not get access to nuclear material." So what we're being told right now, you have two different sets of information, of intelligence coming out. You have the White House, you have the State Department, you have Israel, the Ministry of Defense in Israel, and they're coming out and they're all saying, to kind of cover their asses, and this is where things get murky here, but they're coming out to cover their asses and they're saying things like, Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. Iran's nuclear program has been set back several years, several decades. Isfahan, Fordow, completely destroyed, completely wiped out. Isfahan, destroyed, wiped out. And what's so strange about this is that there's counterintelligence from the Defense Intelligence Agency and other elements in the intelligence community who are saying things that directly contradict the White House narrative. They're saying, no, we haven't destroyed all of their nuclear facilities. We haven't completely decimated or obliterated or annihilated their nuclear capability. We don't even know where the stockpile of highly enriched uranium is. We don't know where it's located. We haven't seen it. We haven't found it. So you have a high level of misdirection and disinformation being spewed from the White House, or at least if it's not disinformation, it's misinformation being spewed, being propagandized from the White House that completely contradicts what the intelligence community is saying. And it's been like this for a long time. And that's what's particularly confusing about this. In March, we had the threat assessment, and it said Iran was not currently pursuing a nuclear weapon. Then you had, last week, another assessment come out saying Iran was at least 3 years away from a nuclear weapon. And then you have elements in the White House saying they have 60% highly enriched uranium. They're only 2 weeks away from acquiring the fissile material that's necessary for building a nuclear bomb. Well, which one is it? And this is what's particularly confusing, because when people say intelligence, what does that mean? I mean, you have CENTCOM, you have STRATCOM, you have the CIA, you have Mossad, okay? You have the DIA. You have all these different intelligence apparatus members, and they're all saying different things, and it's a different report each week. 1 week, they're 3 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. 1 week, they're 3 years from a nuclear weapon. Then you have leaks to the press saying they don't have a nuclear weapons program. Which one is it? Or you have leaks to the press saying that we didn't destroy Fordow. Then you have the White House saying, but we did destroy Fordow. We did obliterate it. So which one is it? That's what's so confusing about all this. You don't know who's telling the truth. Everybody has a different agenda here. That's what makes this thing particularly murky. That's what makes this thing particularly complex. But I'm inclined to believe that we didn't destroy Fordow. Because if we did, why did Israel go back in and strike Fordow the following day? If we did, why are there reports coming out that the United States gave Iran forewarning before striking their nuclear facilities, which gave them time to move their stockpiles of highly enriched uranium? Why are there reports coming out of that? These are reports from Qatar, okay? So, which I don't know if that's the most reliable source, but it's like, why are we having these reports coming out in the first place? What is all this? Why is all this misinformation, disinformation being leaked to the press? Why is the White House scrambling to cover their asses? And let me tell you this, I'm inclined to believe that we're being lied to. I'm inclined to believe that we're being lied to by the White House. I'm inclined to believe that the government is not telling us the truth. They're not giving us the full story. That's what I'm inclined to believe. because there has been a concerted effort from the beginning, going all the way back to June 13th, the first night of the strikes. There's been a concerted effort to propagandize in the media. They're telling us Iran is this big bad wolf, this big threat. They're going to nuke America. They're going to nuke Israel. They want to kill all of us. They want to bathe the Middle East in blood. The mullahs are crazy. They've been propagandizing us. They've been programming us to think this way. And I think that lays the groundwork, that creates fertile soil for them to lie about other things, like how much of a threat they are in regards to their nuclear program. I mean, you had people saying they're going to strike America. They don't even have ICBMs. They don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can't even reach the United States if they wanted to, let alone Western Europe. So my thing is, why is the White House so concerned with covering their ass, with really telling us, convincing us that Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan have been completely destroyed? Why are they so concerned with pushing that narrative, with pushing that agenda? And they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't be so preoccupied with doing that unless there was something more to the story, unless there was something else at play. And so here we have a report, and this is from the Institute for the Study of War. It says here, quote, "The New York Times published a June 25th report on a leaked low-confidence U.S. intelligence assessment of the recent U.S. strikes on Fordo fuel enrichment plant. The New York Times and other Western media outlets cite very little direct information from the report. Unspecified sources in their characterization of the assessment said that the Defense Intelligence Agency assessed that the U.S. and Israeli strikes. Unspecified officials added that the findings indicated that U.S. bunker buster bombs sealed entrances to 2 unspecified nuclear sites but failed to collapse their underground buildings." Sorry, I botched that quote a little bit. The grammar here is a bit odd. But that's from the Institute for the Study of War.com. And then this is what it says about the stockpiles. And this is also from the Institute for the Study of War. It says here, quote, "An initial U.S. intelligence report assesses that airstrikes ordered by President Donald Trump against Iran's nuclear facilities set Tehran's program back by months, but did not eliminate it, contradicting claims by Trump and his top aides about the mission's success. According to 3 people familiar with the report, U.S. intelligence reports also indicate that Iran moved multiple batches of its highly enriched uranium out of the nuclear sites before the strikes occurred, and that the uranium stockpiles were unaffected," said the person, who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive intelligence matters. So, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan haven't been completely destroyed. They probably still have undisclosed facilities. That's what different elements of the intelligence agency are saying. They say Iran still likely has undisclosed nuclear facilities, and we haven't destroyed their highly enriched uranium stockpile. So where does that leave us? That leaves us here. The United States cannot have Iran acquire a nuclear weapon. That's out of the question. Iran has been a thorn in the side of the entire region for the last 30, 40 years. A thorn in the side of the Gulf and a thorn in the side of Israel. Because the United States and the West are predominantly interested, at least this is what would make most logical sense. I don't know, there could be something I'm missing here. But the United States is predominantly interested in creating a Middle East that is stable so that they can pivot to China. That means eliminating the proxies. That means defanging Iran. And that means ensuring that foreign capital and Lebanon, Iraq, Iran are all opened up to Western investment so that we can flood those countries with capital, privatize, deregulate, and then repatriate the funds back to the States. That would make the most logical sense. And leaving that region in a phase or in a state of stability where there's multilateral trade agreements between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, which is already happening. UAE, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, you get the idea. And it's a prosperous, stable, and lucrative region that doesn't have to worry about the constant threat of Iran, with the proxies potentially being able to sabotage shipping in the Red Sea, potentially being able to destroy corridors and railways that go from the Gulf to Israel. You get the idea. So that is the United States vision. That's my assumption. There could be more to the story there, but that's what I'm going with. Then you have Israel. Israel's long-term strategic objectives, obviously to become the dominant power, or at least a co-dominant power in the Middle East. IMEC corridor, memorandums of understanding with various Gulf states, security agreements, joint ventures on tech startups, things like that, infrastructural projects, East Mediterranean pipeline, becoming a hub for liquid natural gas and natural gas exporting to Europe to make them a more lucrative country, to attract more investment. Because they also, with Israel, it's a little bit more complicated because they benefit from instability, but too much instability is not good either. So they're walking a tightrope. Because on some level, when the region is unstable, when you have all these proxies, and let's be real, in a lot of ways, the proxy thing is a bit overblown, at least from Israel's perspective. Israel is backed by the United States. They have F-35s. They have nuclear weapons. They have ballistic missiles. They have fighter jets. You know what I mean? They have, I don't know if they have a navy, but I know they have submarines. They have a nuclear triad, so that means they have submarines that can launch ballistic missiles and launch nuclear warheads. So Israel is a far more capable enemy, and let's be real, their intelligence capabilities are first class. It's just world class. So let's be real. They are significantly more powerful than anybody that is around them. Iran is a crippled country. It is a weak country. Iran has 14 fighter jets. All of them are from the 1970s. They're all old. They're Tomcats. They're F-14s, F-4s, F-5s. You can't fly a Tomcat over Iraq or Jordan without being detected by some radar station that's owned by some U.S. base, because the U.S. obviously has bases in Iraq and I believe in Jordan. But if not, there's radar stations there that are operated by U.S. allies. And the moment one of these old 1970s shitbox fighter jets goes over the border and leaves Iran and goes into Iraq or goes into Jordan, it's going to get shot down. Not to mention we have aircraft carriers surrounding the region. And obviously they come with radars as well. So it's like, and they have air defense. So Iran really can't do shit. Their country is poor. Their country is crippled. Their defense spending is like 1/4 or 1/3 of what Saudi Arabia's is. They have an aerospace program. They've pumped all their money into this nuclear thing and into this into this ballistic missiles program, but they don't really have anything besides that. Their ground forces, to my understanding, aren't that great. They have these proxy forces, but they're significantly crippled. Hamas is basically defeated. Hezbollah is still regrouping. And Tehran had an order on Hezbollah to attack Israel after they got hit in Operation Rising Lion on the 13th. And Hezbollah wouldn't do it because they said, hey, we got to regroup. We're weak. Our leadership is fractured. We're not going to attack them. We don't want to escalate. And plus, Hezbollah is really more preoccupied, at least now, with Lebanese politics, because they're seeing what's happening to Iran. And if they want to survive, integrating into Lebanese politics is realistically their best bet at doing so. So they're more concerned with that. And this idea that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, who pretty much operate independently, and these popular mobilization forces and the Islamic resistance in Iraq, who are, let's be real, they're more concerned with Iraqi politics as well, in the same way that Hezbollah is concerned with Lebanese politics, to act as if these proxies, which are dangerous, I don't want to downplay the threat too much, they are dangerous, They do attack bases in the Middle East. They do attack United States bases. They do attack shipping. They do attack Israeli soil. They do, but they are not as strong as everybody makes them out to be. Israel blows it out of proportion. They blow it way out of proportion. Way out of proportion. And Iran has been slashing funding for Hezbollah. They've been slashing funding for the PMF. They've been withdrawing their Quds forces, advisors from Syria, from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Yemen for a year now. You know, they don't have Security Council meetings with Hezbollah nearly as often in Tehran because they're trying to publicly distance themselves from Hezbollah to increase their global legitimacy, to increase their legitimacy in the region. They're being very strategic here. They don't want to give up and neuter themselves completely by not supporting their proxies, but they also realize that if they support their proxies too much, especially now with Hamas being decimated, with Hezbollah being decimated, they realize now that strategically they're becoming more of a liability than a benefit. And that's just the truth. You can look all this up yourself. This is all out there. But here's the thing. Israel benefits from having all these proxy forces, from having this big Iranian boogeyman. Because when that happens, one, the United States is compelled into helping Israel pursue their own geopolitical strategic objectives. This is just a fact. We're compelled into helping Israel with their geopolitical strategic objectives. Greater Israel, IMF, East Mediterranean Pipeline, IMF corridor, which really I don't even understand why we would be helping them with that, because that would just sabotage our ability to export liquid natural gas to European markets, and it would make Israel more competitive. So I don't know why we would really help them with that. I don't see the rationale behind that. Maybe there's something I'm missing there. There might be. I'm willing to admit that. But like I was saying, Israel benefits from pulling us in, because when that happens, we send them more F-35s, more munitions, more missiles, whatever, more military assets, you know what I'm saying? So more air defense units, of course, a bigger military budget for them, and more strategic collaboration in dealing with issues in the region, threats in the region, dealing with Iran. And here's the issue. Since 2011, the Obama administration has been trying to get us to rebalance. It's called the rebalancing. Rebalance to Asia, pivot to Asia. And it harms the United States in the long term to be so sucked in here, because it's like every air defense system, all the money and aid, all the military assets, all the aircraft carriers, all the fighter jets, all the stuff that we could otherwise be sending to arm and assist the people who are on the South China Sea and the East China Sea, like Malaysia, like the Philippines, like Malaysia, like Indonesia, like Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, all those countries, rather than focusing on them, like I said, multilateral agreements, maybe security agreements, trade agreements, all that stuff, rather than focusing on that and bolstering them militarily to keep them out of China's orbit, reducing tariffs, things like that. Rather than doing that, rather than focusing on that and protecting those countries, Taiwan obviously, rather than doing that, we spend all this time really fighting Israel's battles, or at least helping Israel fight their battles. And here's the thing. I'm not going to deny that Iran is not a threat, because Iran does destabilize the Middle East. This is just a fact. This is really just a fact. It is. Their support for the Houthis makes them more formidable. And the Houthis are a problem, like obviously a problem, for Saudi Arabia, for Europe, for shipping. And so I understand why preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon at all costs makes sense. And this is what happens. Iran, if they get a nuclear weapon, will use it as a backstop, the same way Kim Jong-un did. What Kim Jong-un did was he got a nuclear weapon, and I said this earlier, but just to reiterate, he got a nuclear weapon, used it as a backstop, built an ICBM, built up his Navy, built up his Air Force, built up his aerospace program, and used conventional means to check all the other countries that were in his region and made their country incredibly formidable, incredibly formidable. And now nobody wants to fuck with them and nobody really can check them because whether you like them or not, North Korea is a global superpower. Militarily, at least, they are a superpower, a very formidable country. And if that happens with Iran, there really won't be any way of stopping them other than a full-scale ground invasion and overthrowing the government. That would literally be the only way, which could be a disaster on so many levels. That could be a disaster. Like for the reasons I reiterated earlier, humanitarian crisis, disruption of supply chains, sectarian violence, refugee crisis, humanitarian crisis, vast death, destabilization of bordering countries. Like really bad shit could happen. It's important to keep that in mind. So Iran getting a nuclear weapon would have horrible ramifications for the Middle East. We should all be able to agree on that. All of us should be able to agree on that. But let's sign a deal. Let's just sign a deal. And here's the part that people conveniently always overlook. And look, we're not going to deny the fact that at one point, Iran was pursuing had a nuclear weapons program with warheads, with blueprints, okay, with the necessary components. They did. They had that at one point. 2003, Ahmad Doctrine, Ahmad Report. Go look it up. Hey, everybody. Just wanted to confirm something real quick. I misspoke. It's not actually called the Ahmad Doctrine. It was called Project Ahmad. That was the name of Iran's pre-2003 nuclear weapons program. So I just wanted to clarify that. My apologies for the misconception. It's all there. But keep this in mind. From 2015 to 2018, Iran never violated the JCPOA. They didn't fail one inspection. And under the JCPOA, just to reiterate, they couldn't enrich past 3.67%. They couldn't even reach 5%. They had to pour concrete into their heavy water reactor, which is used to reprocess spent fuel rods. Oh, I'm sorry, not reprocessed. It's used to expose fuel rods to radiation, and then you take those spent fuel rods and reprocess them through a process called Purex, plutonium-uranium reduction extraction, where you get plutonium from these spent fuel rods, and then you reduce them into a metal, and then you melt them and shape them into a core that you can stuff into a nuclear warhead. So they redesigned their heavy water reactor so that it couldn't be used to expose fuel rods to radiation, and they had to, the core in it, they had to redesign the Iraq and heavy water reactor and pour concrete into it so that they couldn't reprocess spent fuel rods, and then they had to send their spent fuel rods to France. They did that, okay? They negotiated, they worked, they were rational. So they did that, poured concrete into their heavy water reactor, sent out their spent fuel rods so that they didn't have any ability to reprocess to get a plutonium bomb, a plutonium weapon, 24/7 monitoring, 24/7 remote surveillance, okay, daily inspections, snap inspections, arbitrary inspections at all their facilities, even at their military facilities. This is documented. Go look this up. They were allowed, the IAEA was allowed to go into Iran's military facilities where they had centrifuges. And this is a standard that even the United States and weapon states, nuclear weapon states, don't have to abide by. This is a standard that no other country has to abide by under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If you have a nuclear weapon, you are not required to allow any inspectors at your military sites where you might be storing those nuclear weapons. You don't have to do that. Iran allowed, and I'm sorry, I said centrifuges earlier. I didn't mean that. Nuclear weapons, bombs. They allowed inspectors from the IAEA to visit their military sites, which is very intrusive, very intrusive. So they allow them to visit their nuclear sites. They allow them to visit their military sites. They allowed 24/7 remote surveillance of their centrifuges to make sure that they were constantly monitored and never went past a particular level of enrichment. And they shipped out their highly enriched uranium stockpile. They got rid of it. made sure they never had more than 300 kilograms. Okay? So this is the country that we're talking about wanting to nuke everybody. A country that under the JCPOA from 2015 to 2018 never failed an inspection. Not once. Never. Go look that up. I promise you. And so this kind of characterization, this dedication to characterizing this country as a country that just wants to kill everybody and destroy everybody is just a blatant lie. That is not to say they don't pose a legitimate threat. They do. They do pose a legitimate threat. They shouldn't have a nuclear weapon, because if they do, that would allow them way more leverage over every other country in the Middle East. Way more leverage. That would be a problem, a huge problem. It could discourage investment. It could embolden them to continue supplying and funding and empowering their proxies. And it would make their proxies way more powerful, way more of a threat. That can't happen. That cannot happen. I agree. That should never happen. But be that as it may, there needs to be a way to find a nuclear deal agreement to this situation. And Iran has made it clear. They are willing to do so. They are willing to agree to a consortium deal. They floated this in May. They said, we'll do a consortium deal where there's oversight on our enrichment from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia. We'll allow that. But they want this done under the condition that it's binding. It has to be binding. Most people, most serious people who aren't hardcore Israel Zionists, we want to kill Iran. Iran is the devil. Iran is crazy. The mullahs. They want to soak the world in blood. They want to dowagandize the whole world. People who don't believe that, people who are more reasonable and rational, would agree that Trump coming in and destroying the JCPOA and backing out was a disaster, huge disaster. That incentivized Iran. That really did give Iran a whether you like it or not, that gave Iran a pretext to pursue a nuclear weapon, because the sanctions came right back. The sanctions came right back. As soon as Trump backed out of the JCPOA, boom, sanctions came back. So Iran, for their own sake, is interested. Really, it makes sense. They are forcing the United States to go into an agreement, a nuclear agreement that's legally binding, that's ratified through Congress, where if the United States decides to abruptly back out of the agreement or approve drone strikes, airstrikes on Iran, there will be some kind of punishment, whether it's a fine from the UN, whether there's legal shields or counter sanctions, something. But it doesn't make sense, given everything that's happened, given Trump pulling the rug on them with the negotiations and saying that it was all a ruse from the beginning, and that they gave tacit approval to Israel to strike them the day before, or was it a day or 3 days before? I know there was supposed to be a deal or a meeting the following day, that Friday, and then potentially another one that Sunday, one in Oslo and then one in Oman. But what I'm saying here is this. If they're going to use negotiations as a ruse to go ahead and attack them anyways, why would they trust them now to not do the same thing moving forward? Iran knows that there's an entire machine, an entire camp, apparatus in the United States Congress that wants war. Elements in the Pentagon that want war. CENTCOM that want war. Israel wants war, because they all fundamentally view Iran to be this massive, huge threat. Which you can make that argument. I'm willing to hear that argument. But from Iran's perspective, why would they now give up R&D on advanced centrifuges, give up allowing themselves to enrich to at least 20%, give up their centrifuges now, and completely reduce the number of operating centrifuges they have going at their various facilities? If it's not binding, if it's not tied to some guaranteed long-term sanctions relief. Like, that was the thing that always really struck me from the beginning. It was unconditional surrender. Does anybody think that's a good way to negotiate? Unconditional. That's not negotiation. That's bullying. And When a country has its entire ethos built on resistance, built on toughness, built on fighting the West, it looks incredibly weak and delegitimizes the regime that's currently there if they capitulate to the West because we grab them by the fucking shoulders and push them to a wall and say, sign a deal. That doesn't benefit them. That looks weak. That looks cowardly. That looks feeble. And so this zero enrichment red line that Washington established from the beginning was conducive to war, was conducive to creating a pretext that would allow these kinds of strikes, these kinds of military operations. Because if you know that your enemy, if you know Iran is never going to agree to no enrichment on their territory, giving up all their centrifuges, sending their centrifuges to a different country, putting them under the monitoring of the IAEA, destroying them themselves, if you know that they're not willing to do that, and if you know they're not going to give up enrichment, you know that going in, and they demonstrated that several times from the beginning, from round one. They've been saying this since April. They've been saying, we are not going to give up enrichment. That is a red line. If you know that they're not willing to do that, then of course the only other alternative is war. The only other alternative is bombing the country. If you demonstrate that you don't trust another country, that country is probably not going to trust you. Because if you don't trust someone, you're more likely to sabotage them. And here's the latest. This is, we have Trump's statements about the war and what negotiations will look like moving forward. This is from the Institute of War. It says here, Trump's statements about the war and the situation moving forward. Trump stated on June 25th that the United States would not allow Iran to rebuild its uranium facilities and that he would be willing to strike Iran again to prevent it from doing so. The United States and Iran have maintained their negotiating positions from before the conflict on Iranian uranium enrichment. Iranian Vice President Mohammad Reza Arif reiterated on June 25th that Iran will not negotiate on Iran's right to enrich uranium on Iranian territory. The United States has maintained its demand for Iran to maintain zero uranium enrichment capabilities. The United States and Iran are expected to meet next week of June 29th to discuss a potential nuclear deal. U.S. President Donald Trump suggested that a nuclear deal with Iran may not be necessary due to damage inflicted on the nuclear program. So what does that tell you? Both sides have maintained their position on uranium enrichment. Trump is now saying he might not even need a deal. And it already says here, it says, Trump stated on June 25th that the United States would not allow Iran to rebuild its uranium facilities and that he would be willing to strike Iran again to prevent it from doing so. So he's willing to strike. Israel wants to strike. He hasn't changed his negotiating position. Iran is probably not going to be more willing. If anything, they're going to be less willing to give up their enrichment for obvious reasons. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave us now? Because a peace deal is not more likely. A nuclear deal is not more likely. What's more likely is that this thing spills out. Trust is completely dismantled, destroyed. And that leaves us with only one recourse, which is continued military action, continued military campaign. And if these regimes don't trust each other, that's really the fundamental problem here. The IRGC and the Ayatollah don't trust Israel or the United States because they've been plotting to overthrow the government. They've been sabotaging their military command. So if they don't trust each other, if Trump and Israel don't trust them not to build a nuclear weapon, and Iran doesn't trust them and they don't want to give up enrichment, what other alternative is there other than regime change? Because with this regime, it's obvious now that they're not going to want to give up a nuclear weapon. There's just no way. Not this regime, not the Ayatollah, not the IRGC, not the hardliners. There's just no way. Because what happens now is you've hit them, You fake them out with the negotiations. You've pledged basically this unwavering loyalty to Israel. You've allowed them to commit, I don't want to get into the legalese of it, of genocide and whatnot, but you've allowed them to commit a mass cleansing, mass extermination of the population in Gaza. And you've greenlit strikes on their country. And you bomb their nuclear facilities. And you're not willing to negotiate with them on any of their demands. You're not willing to meet them anywhere on their demands. So I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to wrap my head around why they would be more willing to make a deal now. Like, there's just no plausible way that happens. The only deal I see Iran accepting at this point would be a deal where they keep enrichment, maybe limit the amount of R&D they do on advanced models, limit their enrichment to 20%, give up their fuel rod reprocessing, and maybe they'd be willing to ship out their highly enriched uranium stockpile. Well, that'd obviously be a prerequisite for the United States, but giving up enrichment and capping their enrichment capability to less than 20%, I don't know how that happens. I don't see how that happens. And now Trump's saying he doesn't even think they'll need a deal, which obviously you need a deal because you can't just do nothing. It's either you make a deal or you strike their country. There isn't a do nothing option. That's not an option. Because if you do nothing, Israel's going to do something. They're not just going to... You think Israel is just going to sit around and wait for Iran to recoup their strength and rebuild up their nuclear facilities and build an even bigger stockpile of highly enriched uranium? Of course they're not going to do that. Of course they're not going to do that. There's no way that happens. And here's the thing. Here's the fundamental issue. People think we're in the clear now. I think it's way too soon to make that prediction. Because here's the issue. If a deal can't be made and negotiations are just completely shot, inevitably this conflict is going to escalate. Because what's going to happen is Israel is going to go for it. They've already severely degraded all their proxies. They have the support of the United States and the Pentagon. They've already demonstrated that they can get air superiority over Tehran. Their military is shit. Their air force is weak. Their navy is non-existent. All they have are some ICBMs. So if the United States and Israel together in a joint operation go fast and hard, they can completely destroy this country in like less than a month. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that. Without putting boots on the ground. We're talking strikes on strikes on strikes on strikes every single day. Every single day. My only concern here is that if Israel starts taking a massive number of casualties, we're talking in the thousands. If Israel starts taking on a massive number of casualties, starts getting hit with ballistic missiles in their capital, runs low on air defense, the only potential recourse to that is completely leveling this country. Because Washington's not going to let that happen. There's no way. There's no way Washington lets Tel Aviv, Haifa, all these big cities in Israel get completely decimated by Iran and just sit by and let it happen. There's absolutely no way that happens. We're talking aircraft carriers, destroyers, warships. We're talking Tomahawk missiles, submarine missiles. We're talking ballistic missiles, airstrikes, drone strikes on a daily basis at large from Israel and the United States to destroy this country. That's what's going to happen. To overthrow the government. There's literally no way around that happening. There's absolutely no way around that happening unless they make a deal. And the chances of them making a deal are lower now than they ever have been. And what happens when the regime gets toppled? What happens then? Do we just install a new government? This new guy comes in, pledges his loyalty to the West, integrates into the region, and everything is smooth sailing from that point forward? I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. And for one reason, primarily, the IRGC has multiple branches. They have a paramilitary. They have the Quds Force. Iran has a standing army. It's called Artesh, the Iranian Armed Forces. So I'm trying to understand how this doesn't escalate. How this, like, the West comes in, kills the government, overthrows the leader, assassinates the Ayatollah, puts in this new government, this sock puppet government, and they just assume it's going to be stable? Is that the assumption here? Because you're putting a lot of stock into this idea of overthrowing the current regime and putting in a new one, and things from that point forward are just kind of easier and smoother. And they pledge their allegiance to the West. And we're kind of being told and compelled to believe that everybody in Iran hates the regime. Everybody in Iran hates the mullahs. They want to overthrow the government. We need a color revolution. We need to liberalize the country. We need to free the people, liberate them. But my thing is, there's probably a lot of people who do feel that way, especially in Tehran, especially in the capital. This is a more cosmopolitan area. But that doesn't change the fact that there's still a large population of people in the country who are hardline. Large portion of people in the country who are hardline, who support the regime, who are rallying around the regime now and being radicalized. And those people aren't just going to sit around and do nothing. I mean, have we not seen this? And I'm not, look, people are going to call this Iraq war syndrome. Oh, he has IPS, Iraq paranoia syndrome. He has Bush era syndrome. But I'm just pointing out the historical precedent here. Because in every country with a government that's been toppled, regardless of if you think it was justified, you can make the arguments that it was justified. I'm willing to hear you out. Bashar al-Assad was a bad guy. He was killing a lot of people. He was a destabilizing force in the Middle East. We had to back insurgent groups, which we did. Go look this up. We had to back insurgent groups. Israel backed insurgent groups to rise up and overthrow the government. That is a true thing that did happen. And whether or not the country is better now is yet to be seen. But the fact of the matter is, every time we have this overthrowing of a government, it doesn't, especially in this region, it doesn't go well. Somalia, civil war, political instability, deaths on a daily basis, massive civil unrest. Sudan, civil war. They've been in a civil war since 2023. Tens of thousands of people dead. Country is completely split. Libya, civil war. 2 rival factions controlling the country. Slave trade in the capital. Completely decimated the country. Lebanon, civil war. Hezbollah and the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government are at odds, jockeying for control over the country. And Israel still, to this day, is flirting with the idea of annexing parts of Lebanon. We have Syria. Up until recently was completely decimated, completely split, 500,000 people dead. Iraq. I don't know if you can make the argument that it's more stable now, but you have Iranian proxies there, you have Kurdish separatists living there, you have ISIS elements living there. So that country is a tinderbox in a lot of ways. And then now you want to go ahead and do this again in Iran and assume that you're going to get a different outcome. And that's my concern. That's where I push back. If you want to drone strike their facilities, if you want to hammer their facilities, make sure they don't get a nuclear weapon, I'm all for it. They don't need a nuclear weapon. Iran should never have a nuclear weapon. I agree. My only worry is how this escalates if we go in and start fucking with the government. And I think that's a valid concern. I think that's a fair concern. Because oftentimes these things turn into a vortex. They're never as clean as they're expected to be. And given the fact that Israel in a lot of ways would benefit from a Middle Eastern quagmire, who's to say they won't do something that could lead that to happening? Because like I said, the longer the United States is in the Middle East, the more Israel benefits, militarily and financially, and strategically. So all I'm saying is, my concern is these strikes turn into this full-scale attempt to overthrow the government if they don't accept a nuclear deal, which is likely to happen. and we're going to support it and we're going to fund it because I don't know if Israel is capable of doing it on their own. I'm not saying we're going to put boots on the ground. I don't see that happening. But if we overthrow the government and the country turns into a complete free-for-all, I mean, what happens then? Who's going to clean up that mess? Who's going to be expected to clean up that mess? Israel ain't going to do it. The Gulf states probably won't do it. We're going to have to do it. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying we should be careful. I don't think Iran should have a nuclear weapon. That's why I prefer the diplomatic approach. I do. Something like the JCPOA, but with longer provisions and with something that's legally binding and trying to rebuild trust with the current regime and maybe flooding the country with foreign investment and foreign capital and liberalizing them and opening them up. And maybe some way of de-radicalizing the country's ideology, getting more moderate elements in there. I think that's probably a better approach. That approach probably has less likelihood of being a complete disaster, mayhem shit show. And I think, like I said, I think Iran is willing to cooperate because we've been programmed into believing that Iran is this irrational, genocidal country, but they're not. Iran, after the strikes on the 13th, Operation Rising Lion, Iran held a security conference in Tehran, in the capital, and they didn't invite Hezbollah. They were distancing themselves from Hezbollah. They invited some Houthi advisors, they invited some PMF advisors, but they distanced themselves from Hezbollah. Like I said earlier, they slashed funding for Hezbollah. They slashed funding for their fighters. They slashed funding for their civic institutions. Okay? They stopped sending them advanced weaponry like drones and precision guidance kits. So they're not arming Hezbollah nearly as much as they have in the past because they're trying to gain global legitimacy. They want to be brought into the fold. They want to be a part of the global order, even if it's in the Chinese and Russian bloc. It'd be better if they were in our bloc because then we would completely control the Middle East, and that would be fucking amazing. If we controlled Iran, if we controlled the Gulf, and we controlled Israel, that would be beautiful. I think that's the play. I think that's the better play. Making a deal with Iran, making sure they don't get a nuclear weapon, defanging them, figuring out a way to de-radicalize their elements rather than just bombing the fuck out of the country and potentially leading to a disaster. That's all I'm saying, okay? And I feel like that's a good argument. There's a good argument to be made there because under the JCPOA from 15 to 18, they never failed an inspection. There's precedent for this. I'm not just floating these ideas out there. I'm not just blowing smoke into your ass. There's precedent of this country being willing to cooperate. Obviously, this would have to be done in some kind of framework where they stop associating completely. And there's some kind of mechanism where we can put sanctions back on them if they support the Houthis, support Hezbollah, support Islamic resistance in Iraq, support the PMF, support Hamas. All right? But I'm saying there is a diplomatic solution here. I know there is. There's always a diplomatic solution if you meet other people where they are. And if you stop going in with this unconditional surrender or we're going to bomb the fuck out of you approach. Doesn't seem like a good negotiating strategy, but that's just me. I might not know what I'm talking about. Maybe Trump knows more than me, but that's just my 2 cents. But here's what I'm saying. Last year, Iran and the United Arab Emirates increased their trade by $2 billion. They're working on joint infrastructure projects. Saudi Arabia and Iran are reopening embassies in each other's countries. They're cooperating and sharing intelligence with each other to limit the capacity and how formidable the Houthis are. Iran is currently talking about building a pipeline that goes from Oman through the Strait of Hormuz with Oman. They're talking about joint infrastructure projects with them. Okay? Iran is talking about building a pipeline through Pakistan. They're expanding their energy grid in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Armenia, into Turkey. They're increasing their trade with Turkey by at least $30 billion. They joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They joined BRICS. They stopped doing public parades for Hamas. The last one they did was Ismail Haniyeh. That was the last public parade they had was Ismail Haniyeh when he was killed after being bombed in the capital. They stopped arms trafficking to Gaza. They cut funding for the Qassam brigades, which is Hamas's military wing. They've withdrawn Quds Force advisors. I said this already, but they withdrew Quds Force advisors from Iraq. They've been withdrawing Quds Force advisors from Syria and Yemen. In March, they were telling the Houthis to stand down when they were attacking Red Sea shipping. They told them to stand down. The Houthis wouldn't do it. They've specifically told in the past on multiple occasions their militias in Iraq to stop attacking military bases. So all I'm saying here is this. My issue here is simply that we have been so preconditioned to believe that this country is evil and just wants to destroy everybody. And they are a threat. The proxies are a problem. And the hardliners in the government are a problem. They need to be dealt with. The Houthis need to be dealt with, or at least dissociated with as far as Iran is concerned. Stop funding them, stop training them. But we need to deal with the hardline elements of the IRGC, obviously. We need to figure out a way to get them on the same page as the West and to rebuild trust. We need to disincentivize them and punish them, carrot stick type of stuff, to get them to stop supporting all these proxies like Hezbollah, like Harakat Hezbollah, like all these PMF militias. They've already stopped supporting Hamas. And there's a willingness. We see it. Like I said, all these joint infrastructure projects with the Gulf countries like the UAE, sharing of gas fields with Qatar, willingness to cooperate with Saudi Arabia to deal with the Houthis, intelligence sharing. I mean, there's an obvious willingness with this regime to cooperate with their regional compatriots if there's a pretext to do so. I mean, these are rational actors. They're concerned with their self-preservation, their survival. And I think something needs to be done about this radical Shiite uprising identity, this ethos. And if there is a way to decouple that from this regime, I don't know if you can, but I think it can be done. Maybe I'm being optimistic here. Without bombing the country and killing a whole bunch of people and overthrowing the government, which could lead to massive instability in the region, obviously, for obvious reasons, like I've already explained, then we should go that route. I think that's the better route to go down. But this constant insistence that they're going to build a nuclear weapon, they're going to have a nuclear program, they're going to kill everybody, they're going to bathe the world in blood, we see that's not the case. They called Qatar and let them know that they were sending a ballistic missile there so that they had time to knock it down. And they've been doing this for a long time. All these kinds of theatrical, choreographed, telegraphed ballistic missile strikes into Israel that haven't killed anybody. They're landing in the fucking desert. And they're calling them ahead of time to let them know, hey, we're sending a missile over. It's going to be there in half an hour. Just wanted to let you know. It's like, obviously, a country like that is more concerned with its self-preservation than aggressing. So all I'm saying here is this. Try to see the rationality behind their actions other than blanketing them as genocidal freaks. Because then you're going to get a fuller understanding of what's really going on here. Realistically, we were the first ones to aggress. All the way back in the 50s, Mohammad Mosaddegh, the prime minister of Iran, wanted to nationalize their oil, which would have significantly reduced or increased the price of oil globally when they wanted to nationalize it. So we went ahead and did a CIA coup, overthrew the government, and put in a monarch who was then overthrown 26 years later. So in a lot of ways, we have contributed to this country's instability as it stands because they wanted autonomy from the West. Anybody who wants autonomy from the West, they're going to get punished. Okay? And we can have a question about whether that framework is okay or not, but assuming that we exist in that framework, in that global order, it makes sense why we see Iran as a threat now, okay? Because they are a threat to that global order. So, like I said earlier, just to reiterate, this country, Iran, They're working on expanding their electrical grids, becoming an electrical hub for all the countries in the North-South corridor, for all the countries bordering them, Afghanistan, Iraq. They've extended their contracts with Iraq. They're trying to synchronize their transmission, their electrical transmission. They're trying to build pipelines in Pakistan. They're cooperating with BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're distancing themselves from their proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the PMF and the Houthis. So there's obviously a trend here. We're seeing with Iran a willingness to back away from their proxies, cooperate with big players, cooperate with global hegemons if they feel as if their survival is not on the line. And the problem is, I don't think Israel wants that. And I think that's a big problem that needs to be addressed. I don't think Israel wants a stable, cooperative Iran. I don't think Israel wants that. Because if that happens, the United States sees less of a reason to get entangled into Middle Eastern conflicts, which forces Israel to integrate into the region where they can't control the ebbs and the flows, where they can't become the hub of the region. Maybe it makes building the IMEC corridor more difficult. Maybe it makes building East Med pipeline more difficult. Maybe trade from the Gulf to the port of Haifa becomes less common. I don't know. I'm speculating here. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on geopolitical, economic, trends, because I'm not. But what I'm saying here is it is in their best interest economically long term to weaken this country, not to see this country powerful, because they're the only real adversary there. And I think that's a real element that needs to be considered when in your analysis of this entire conflict. It can't just be Iran is dedicated, wedded to the idea of destroying everybody. It's deeper than that. It's way deeper than that. There's a metagame here being played. Economic metagames here being played. Geopolitical metagames here being played. The nuclear program is just one piece of the puzzle. There's so many other pieces here that you need to put together to understand everything that's going on. So anyways, that's my take on all this, okay? And you can have your opinion. If you think Iran is this big, bad devil that needs to be wiped off the face of the earth in order to ensure peace and stability in the Middle East, you can have that opinion. I will listen to your opinion. I will hear you out. I won't agree. I think Israel is just as much of a destabilizing force in the Middle East as Iran, as demonstrated by many of their various military operations that have been condemned by the United States on multiple occasions, going all the way back to the invasion in 1982, which violated the Reagan administration's foreign policy. Their invasion of Lebanon in 1978 using armored personnel carriers that were given to them. Sorry, camera died. As I was saying, you can go all the way back to the 70s. You had these armored personnel carriers under the Armed Exports Control Act being sent to Israel, and they said, hey, you can only use these armored personnel carriers in the context of self-defense, of an incursion on your territory. They used it to invade Lebanon. And so, look, you have a pattern here. They've sold our military equipment to China, and if anybody knows anything about China, they do forced tech transfer, because China is a state capitalist-run country. So all the tech companies that operate in China, they send a bunch of guys in there who are wearing suits, who are wearing chest plates, body armor, guns. They go in there, they go to the CEO or whoever's running the show, and they say, hey, here's a hard drive. Let me plug it into your computer. We're going to extract all the data out of it, and now we know every single piece of software that's on this hard drive, and we know all your all your technology tricks. That's what China does. And Israel sent our military equipment to that country knowing that's how they operate. And we ended up having to cancel our yearly interagency meetings with Israel because they did that. And that's just one of many examples. You have the fact that they annexed the Golan Heights, expand settlements in the West Bank. The fact that they bombed Iraq's nuclear reactors, invaded Lebanon in 1982, all against the Reagan administration's reticence. They use our pre-positioned military weapons for their own military operations. And so, look, all I'm saying here is there's a pattern of defiance. In a lot of ways, they are reckless. They are a liability in many ways. They've severely impaired and damaged our global reputation as the arbiter of the world order and justice and righteousness. And so you have to have a balanced conversation here. And look, I just want to make it clear, Iran, their current government is an issue. It is. It's an issue. And I want to address that for a second because I've spent a lot of time defending Iran. Look, Iran has attacked multiple bases. They killed hundreds of people during the Iraq war with EFPs, okay? They've kidnapped ambassadors, diplomats, all right? They've been involved in car bombings in the Middle East. And so I understand very clearly this country is problematic. They're a destabilizing force. This is not a conspiracy. And all these Shiite militias that rise up to the beck and call of the Ayatollah, they also create problems. Like, that's just a fact. That's just a fact. Sponsoring terrorist organizations that attack trade routes and shipping and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense. And infrastructure, we get it. That's a problem. That's a fundamental problem. We need to find a way to get them to stop doing that. How can we incentivize them to stop doing that? You can use a carrot or you can use a stick. But you got to find a way, and maybe sticks aren't working as much, but you got to find a way to get them to stop serving and supplying and benefiting all those proxies. That's obviously a part of this. Obviously, you need to find a way to get them to stop pursuing a nuclear weapon in the same way that Korea, in the same way that South Korea, in the same way that all these other nuclear weapon or non-nuclear weapon states have a civilian nuclear program. Get them to fall in line with that if you can. They're saying we're not giving up enrichment. I don't know how that looks. Maybe give them enrichment, but with extreme protocols, inspections, sending our own guys over there every day, 24/7 monitoring, all that stuff. Okay? But we have to recognize here, at least on some level, that this is the West trying to force a sovereign country to bend the knee. It's just the truth. It's just the truth. And you have to be willing to understand that at some point, people might push back and be like, we're not going to completely let you defang us. We'll listen. We'll cooperate. You're the more powerful country. You're the global hegemon, but there's limits, all right? Giving up enrichment, especially considering the fact that we have a country that's been trying to assassinate our leadership for years now, is on the loose. Completely neutering ourselves and giving up enrichment seems like a bit too much of an ask. So all I'm saying here is find a way to get them to stop with the proxies. Find a way to get them to, severely give up their nuclear capabilities, with one hedge being their ability to enrich, and only to a low percentage, a very low percentage, to limit their breakout time. That makes sense. That was working from 2015 to 2018. I don't know why it wouldn't work now. And limit this constant antagonism against Iran, try to fix relations, bring in some foreign capital investment, warm up the relations, get a détente going with all these other countries in the Gulf, work things out, smooth things out, and then from that point forward, things might get better. But all I'm saying is I'm very reluctant to believe that just striking the country every single day is going to make things better. That's all I have to say about that. And look, my predictions going forward are pretty simple. Until we reach a point where either one side or the other can find a way to fundamentally move through this impasse, there's literally the only option left is regime change. That's it. Like, it's not more complicated than that, because this regime is not going to abandon the prospect of getting a nuclear weapon. We all know this. We all know that. They've been saying it for years and years and years and years and years, all the way back since the JCPOA days. They're not going to give up enrichment. This regime is committed to having a latent nuclear program at the very minimum. So all I'm saying is the regime is stubborn. They are not going to give up enrichment. The United States is stubborn. They're not going to allow them to have enrichment. The regime and the United States don't trust each other. Israel hates the regime in Iran. I mean, all signs point in the same direction. Regime change, all of them. I'm not saying boots on the ground regime change, but we're talking bombardment on a level that we haven't seen yet. Big bombardment, like big bombardment. Maybe special ops, who knows? So that's my prediction moving forward, and that's all I have to say about this. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope I gave you guys a balanced perspective. I want to make it clear, I'm not one of these people who wants to come online and defend Iran. I think the country, it's obvious. Every single country in the region hates Iran. Like all of them, including the Gulf states. Their hatred for Iran has pushed them into the hands of Israel. That's why the UAE and Israel have a memorandum of understanding. That's why the UAE and Israel are doing joint investment projects on defense contracting. On defense weaponry. Like, that's why the UAE and Israel are doing joint stock exchanges. Okay, that's why Sudan and Morocco and Bahrain are all siding with Israel now. They're working with them. They're buying their tech. They're investing in their startups. So all I'm saying here is there's a reason, a pattern of behavior here. All these Gulf countries wouldn't be buddy-buddy with Israel if it wasn't for Iran being a far greater problem. Because they know what comes with that. And that's if they side with Iran, they're going against the United States, and you don't want to do that. So there's an obvious reason why they don't like Iran. Like, it's not for no reason. I get that. I understand that. I see that. So I don't want to defend Iran too much. That's all I'm saying. And I hope I gave you guys a balanced take on this. My only fear is full-on regime change, global crisis, supply chains disrupted, inflation, oil prices going up, all that good stuff. All that bad stuff, rather. So anyways, that's my video for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys loved the video and enjoyed it. I really studied hard. I researched. I read as much as I could in the past week or two, learning about this conflict, educating myself, getting myself up to date. I'm still a novice. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm doing my best, and I'm young, and I'm going to get better at this geopolitical thing. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. And with that being said, like, subscribe, comment, and I'm out.